Hi everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening, and thanks to Asian Film Archive for putting together this wonderful retrospective program. Today we are happy to have with us Dr. Lai Chee Kien and Dr. Stephen Teo, who will be sharing with us their insights on Wong Kar Wai and his cinema. So I'm sure this is going to be a really rich and stimulating session, and I wouldn't want to take up too much of their precious time now. So now let us quickly first invite our first speaker, Dr. Lai Chee Kien. Shall we bring Dr. Lai up? Yes. So Dr. Lai,
Hi.
Hi. Dr. Lai is Vice President of the Society of Architectural and Urban Histories of Asia, board member of the Spatial Language Foundation of Arts and Culture Taiwan, and an advisory council member of the International Association for the Study of Traditional Environments. He's an architectural and urban historian and also a registered architect in Singapore. So the title of Dr. Lai's talk today is Wong Kar Wai's Reimagining of Nanyang. Dr. Lai, please.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for to the Asian Film Archive for this opportunity and the honor to present in the same panel as Dr. Stephen Teo. In this short presentation, I would like to discuss the three Wong Kar Wai movies, popularly known as the trilogy of the 1960s. Days of Being Wild, In the Mood for Love, and 2046. The numeral reference 2046 is obviously to Hong Kong, as are the primary location settings for the three movies. I would like to suggest, however, that the trilogy also present the unfolding post-colonial events of the decade around the South China Sea and the construction of spheres of Nanyang and the Chinese diaspora through the medium and production of the movies themselves, the publication industry and community, music as well as food, etc. Next, please. My own entry point, next, please. My own entry point for the observations was by watching In the Mood for Love and followed by Days of Being Wild in that order. I was treated to vignettes like a moody sky with a palm or coconut tree announcing 1963 Singapore, coconut tree motifs on a Hong Kong cafe menu, a 50-second slow-mo pan of a coconut plantation in the Philippines, filmed from a train carriage, the railway and plantation themselves are colonial legacies, and perhaps even the allegory of the bird of paradise, first thought to be legless as observed by early biogeographers. The image at bottom right, believe it or not, is of the coconut plantation at Frankel Estate in 1949, but which has now been developed into housing. So you can see some of the connections. Next, please. The suggested places or settings of travel from Hong Kong in the trilogy, the Philippines, Singapore, and Cambodia, are found at the rim of the South China Sea, like Hong Kong itself. The typhoons that affect the Philippines sometimes affect Hong Kong. It is estimated that 80% of the overseas Chinese, through different waves and routes of migration, found their way to the countries around the South China Sea. Beginning in the 17th century, events in China and the concurrent colonization of Southeast Asian states by Western powers like Spain, the US, the Netherlands, Britain, and France. This created the backdrop for the end of World War II and the Cold War that subsequently unleashed the ensuing politics. Next, please. Nanyang as a concept for the Chinese diaspora needs to be graduated by time intervals. For our purposes, I would like to suggest different phases through 6 decades, affecting different aspects of art, theater, cinema, literature, and everyday life, etc. The first, Nanyang A, is Republican China before 1949. China was ruled by the Communist Party from 1949 onwards, which presaged an exodus of people from the country, including from Shanghai to Hong Kong that had Wong Kar Wai's own family involved. Conditions for the Nanyang B phase, without China, and this is important, initiated a search for local and regional identities by the overseas Chinese. Nanyang Sea, the third one, began to emerge when China gradually re-engaged with the world in the 1970s, and Nanyang D is the phase we are currently experiencing with the full return of China onto the world stage. Next, please. The 1960s trilogy takes place at a time when Nanyang B is in the process of transforming into Nanyang C. Significantly, this is the period when most, if not all, Southeast Asian countries became nation states. Nationalization in the respective countries dictated national languages, national education, and nationalization of businesses and industries, etc., which began to dismantle previous Nanyang connections and networks. As an example, on the right, we can look at the formerly thriving Hokkien film industry, funded by Manila tycoons and made in Hong Kong for Nanyang audiences. When Tagalog was made a national language, that industry dwindled and disappeared. One of its stars, Sui Guan or Xiao Juan, made a mid-career switch, transformed as an Ivy Ling Po, and subsequently soared with Shaw Brothers Mandarin Film Fair and audiences. Next, please. To set the trilogy firmly in the turbulent 1960s, next please, Wong spliced 3 documentary footages within his own. Charles de Gaulle in 1966, Phnom Penh, was renouncing US military presence in Vietnam, with Zhao Mo Wan, the protagonist in The Mood for Love, presumably also there to cover the event. The Star Ferry riots of 1966 and the 1967 leftist riots both point to Hong Kongers' dissatisfaction with British colonial rule, how things have changed. Taken together, it can also suggest the comparative specter that while Southeast Asian countries were respectively battling for self-governance and independence, the future of Hong Kongers and Hong Kong itself were marked by deadlines of 1997 and then 2047. Next, please. When China closed its market to Hong Kong in 1952, Southeast Asia became the main arena for viable movie audiences and revenue. Shaw Brothers consolidated its base in Singapore, although it was previously triangulating with Hong Kong and Shanghai. Along with other movie production houses like Cathay Chris and Kong Yi, the narratives of movies in the 1950s and 1960s and the narratives and locations added those in Nanyang, specifically Singapore and Malaya. These would have been the movies that Wong himself watched after arriving in Hong Kong, including those with tropes and motifs created with the region in mind, such as the invented reading of the Nyonya and local culture, folklore, and customs. An immediate sensory evocation would be the use of coconut trees, as you can see on the screen, and durians in the movies. Next, please. In a deleted scene from In the Mood for Love, next, please, Tony Leung, as the lead character, in fact, consumes many seeds of durian while in Singapore. This was a direct quote from the 1972 book called Intersection by Liu Yichang, on whom Leung's character was based. The Hong Kong author worked at Yi Se Bao, a newspaper in Singapore in 1952, and later in Kuala Lumpur as a reporter from 1953 to 1957. The ingestion of durian, both in the book and the movie, was a signifier of acclimatization to Nanyang, Singapore. Next, please. Nanyang connections through the print media are illustrated on this slide. Obunho and family founded not just the Sinchu Jitpo in Singapore, but also the Singtao Daily in Hong Kong. To serialize his martial arts novels, Louis Cha set up not only Ming Pao in Hong Kong, but also Shin Min Daily News in Singapore. Notably, writers like Yu Dafu shuttled across such transoceanic newspaper jobs. Ku Seok Wan, who you see on the right, set up the Tianan Sin Bao in Singapore at the turn of the century, but later became a correspondent for many Hong Kong newspapers. He most likely popularized the term Sin-Chu to mean Singapore in his dealings, so much so that I believe the name stuck with Hong Kongers and included the naming of hybrid foods like Sing Zhao Cao Mai, the so-called Singapore bee hoon. Next, please. Periodicals, magazines, and comics published in Hong Kong found their way across Southeast Asian cities for targeted readership. Chinese language textbooks, maps, and other instructional materials were supplied to schools and institutions. A widely circulated monthly publication called Chronicles of Nanyang, Nanyang Wensai, published in Hong Kong from 1960 to 73, collated significant newspaper articles and writing from across Nanyang for its readers. Next, please. Even juvenile literature, like Children's Paradise, Nanyang Children, and Children's Corner, were standard fare for young persons like me growing up in the 1960s and 70s. Student essays, for example, from Rangoon, Sandakan, Muar, Phnom Penh, etc., were published on the same page that threaded paper friendships and mutual understanding. Print capitalism, to cite Benedict Anderson, created the imagined communities in the newspapers, literary and reading worlds for the overseas Chinese in Southeast Asia. Next, please. The choice of music and songs for the trilogy was not incidental and connected Hong Kong with the Philippines. Next, please. Filipino musicians have been performing in Shanghai and other Asian cities since the 19th century, and who also departed, the one before, please, who also departed China after 1949. The slide before, please. Their contributions to the music, and entertainment scenes are irreplaceable, especially in the 1950s when Hong Kong movies changed tact to be more cosmopolitan and Western, embracing emergent Latino dance and music forms from South America, for example. James Wong and Joseph Koo remarked that not only were they accomplished musicians in their own right, they could sight read scores and could compose or transpose for a 10-piece band in a few hours, which suited the production climate at that time. Next, please. You've already seen the slide. So I have suggested a paper trail connecting Hong Kong with Singapore and Malaya, as well as a musical one with the Philippines using Wong Kar Wai's 1960s trilogy. There are, of course, other close ties like food and medicine, and one needs just to visit Sheung Wan on Hong Kong Island, even today, to find more of such ties. As Nanyang B formally becomes Nanyang C, these scenes from not so long ago became something we could see but cannot touch. Somewhere through that dusty window, Hong Kong was once part of that space we recognized together as Nanyang. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Lai, for the illuminating talk. It's a very rich contextualization of the relationship between Nanyang and Hong Kong that provides, well, basically the backdrop of Wong Kar Wai's 1960s trilogy, and it's important in knowing the narrative backdrop for these films. So next up, our next speaker is Dr. Stephen Teo, Associate Professor at the Wee Kim Wee School of Communication and Information, Nanyang Technological University. Dr. Teo is the author of Wong Kar Wai, a book published in 2005 by the British Film Institute, of which a Chinese translation has also just been published by Peking University Press. So today, Dr. Teo will be speaking about Happy Together and the contemporary relevance of Wong Kar Wai. Dr. Teo, please.
Thank you very much, Min Hui. I hope I can be heard by everybody. And I don't want to be in a state where, I am talking and nobody hears me. So I assume that everything is fine with my voice being heard and so on. So let me begin by thanking the Asian Film Archive for organizing this event and for inviting me to be part of this panel. And in fact, of course, the Asian Film Archive has done us all a very great service in also organizing this retrospective of 8 films by Wong Kar Wai, which are being restored by Wong himself, and he's re-releasing them in new 4K restorations through the Criterion Collection. But of course, here in Singapore, we're actually going to be watching them on a big screen, right, in the cinema. And I think that will be an amazing experience for those of us or those of you out there, new audiences, new generations coming to the world of Wong Kar Wai, who have never seen Wong Kar Wai films before. I think it will be like eye-popping experience and unforgettable, I would say. Anyway, my talk centers on what I call the contemporary relevance of Wong Kar Wai. And, it's, of course, an opportune time for us to reassess the work of Wong Kar Wai, at this moment in time, at this opportunity of watching, the re-release films in new restorations. And if you were to ask me how I should, reassess these 8 films, or in fact, if you were to ask me to write a new book on Wong Kar Wai, I think I would restructure his films. I would regroup his films into 2 main trilogies. And in fact, of course, Lai Chee Kien has talked about the 1960s trilogy in his very illuminating talk just now, with all those lovely slides about Singapore or the Nanyang back then in the 1960s. And the 1960s is, of course, a very resonant period for Wong Kar Wai in that set of 3 films in the so-called 1960s trilogy. So I would reorganize his films into, firstly, the 1960s trilogy. And so on this score, I and Lai Chee Kien are on the same, wavelength. And then I would come up with another set of 3 films, another trilogy, which I would call the 1990s trilogy. And in this set of 3 films, I would include, firstly, Chungking Express, followed by Fallen Angels, and then the culminating work would be Happy Together. First, let me just say a few remarks about Chungking Express and Happy Together. Now, these films are very loosely structured. They are in fact made up of 2 stories, 2 episodes, and then there are many characters, and they seem very ephemeral, actually, these characters, or rather that they have ephemeral relationships. The relationships seem very offhanded, and they're not long-lasting. And there is a theme, actually, of impermanence. Nothing lasts. Nothing is permanent, as it were. And associated with that, I would say that there's also a theme of identity. And again, here, the idea is that the identity is not fixed. The identity of all these characters is not fixed. There's no real essence about their identities, except perhaps for the essence of human sentiments, human feelings, and emotions, and we have all those in abundance in those 2 films. And there's a feeling, of course, of vibrancy, great energy, a kind of freewheeling nature of being about, going places and being here, there, everywhere in Hong Kong, as it were, and that is particularly reflected, of course, in the first two films, Chungking Express and Fallen Angels. And then I come now to Happy Together. And to my mind, this is probably the most finely realized film of this 1990s trilogy. In fact, I would say that it is one of the most finely realized films in all of Wong Kar Wai's body of work. And because I said it, because it's very compact. It's dramatically compact. Its narrative is very tight as compared with the other two films, which are very loose, very episodic. And also, it's concentrated on, I would say, firstly, on one single character, which is the character of, the character played by Tony Leung. But Tony Leung spends a lot of screen time with his partner, his lover, played by Leslie Cheung. And much of the film actually is really about these two characters. So it works as a two-hander. And so in that sense, the story is concentrated really on these two characters, whereas in the other works, there are many characters, as I said before. And that gives the impression, of course, that this film is much tighter than any of Wong Kar Wai's other works. Now, let me then say a bit about the contemporary relevance of this 1990s trilogy, and then I'll come in particular to the contemporary relevance of Happy Together. Firstly, of course, I call them the 1990s trilogy because all the films are set in its own period, which is, of course, the 1990s, right? And so films like Chungking Express and Fallen Angels are much more optimistic kind of films, although we're very optimistic in Chungking Express. It becomes a bit more darker in Fallen Angels. And then really, by the time we get to Happy Together, it actually gets a bit tragic, a bit more. In fact, it gets really quite tragic at the end of Happy Together. But I'll come to that in a minute. So the contemporary relevance then points to the fact that these are films of its own time, of its own period. Now, I think in Happy Together, this is reflected by what I would call a sort of associative contemporariness of 1997. I mean, it is like a commentary on the 1997 issue at the time. In fact, the film was actually released just 1 month, if I'm not mistaken, just 1 month or maybe 2 months just before the handover was to occur. And the whole film, although it's actually set in Argentina, is really about the idea of getting away from this feeling of dread or the end of days, because this was the kind of pervasive feeling at the time, a lot of anxiety, a lot of anguish, a lot of uncertainty about what was going to happen to Hong Kong when China took over. And you have to recall that, of course, China at that time, in that period, was a much poorer country than it is now. And people think of China as, of course, not having the kind of freedoms that Hong Kong people have. And so, when China was to take over, there was indeed that kind of fear, in fact, a whole syndrome of fear and anxiety over this whole 1997 question. And this is actually reflected quite well in Happy Together. So we can actually then call it an allegory or a commentary on 1997. And in fact, I think the gay relationship is very important to this sort of allegory. Let me explain more clearly why I say that. The film, of course, is about gays. It is a gay film. You could actually call it that, although Wong Kar Wai himself doesn't, disavow that it was a gay film, and he says it's not a gay film, and he has his reasons, and we can, maybe talk about it later. But it is actually, of course, for Hong Kong cinema at that point in time in 1997, it is one of those. It is actually a very rare film that deals with a gay relationship, and one has to recall that, of course, films about gays are like, gay relationships are like taboo subjects, and Wong Kar Wai, of course, broke that taboo. And the idea of the film being very, very resonant to the gays, the gay partners, the gay lovers in the film, of course, reflects also the fact that, in fact, this whole feeling of anxiety and fear was most felt by the gay community in Hong Kong at the time. And it was the gay community that felt that they had the most to lose when China took over. Rightly or wrongly, that was the feeling. And of course, I think the whole film actually reflected that. Although I would have to say that if you would have asked me, what kind of revisionist opinion I would have of the film now, I think I would have to say that in fact this 1997 subtext, watching the film now, doesn't seem to me as strong anymore. And I may even go so far as to say that actually for Wong Kar Wai, I don't think he has really any political axe to grind over 1997, over this whole 1997 issue, or the whole issue of the Hong Kong-China relationship. Now, actually, there's a message for me to, I think, conclude my talk. But I think the other aspect of what makes the film relevant today is still this gay relationship, this status of the film as a gay film. And we can maybe actually talk about it much more during a question time. And it is relevant to us here, particularly, I think, in Singapore, given the fact that people have been trying to repeal Section 377A of the Penal Code, as we all know, but to no avail. And being gay, well, is still perhaps not the right thing to do. So I think the film then would resonate for that very reason. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Teo. I think there's a lot to chew on from your presentation. So maybe also bring Dr. Lai up on the screen right now. Thank you. We'll move on to audience Q&A shortly, but before that, maybe let's take a little moment to first consolidate our thoughts and bring the two presentations together with our speakers. So Dr. Lai and Dr. Teo, It's striking that both of you use the signifier of time, right? Essentially a decade, the 1960s and the 1990s respectively, to identify trilogies in Wong Kar Wai's body of works. So both of you have explained how Wong Kar Wai makes references to for Dr. Lai, an era of the past, and for Dr. Teo, how he addresses contemporary issues and concerns of the 1990s. So I'm interested here in the decade-specific sense of time, right, that is expressed in these two trilogies. Considering that Wong Kar Wai's films are also often regarded as powerful mood pieces, right? What are the feelings or emotions that these films that you've discussed associate these specific times to? And then what is so uniquely Wong Kar Wai about these emotions and feelings that have been evoked and expressed stylistically in these films?
Shall I go first?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Well, let's just maybe focus on Happy Together, right, as a mood piece. You can see from the film the great visual density of the film, through Christopher Doyle's photography and William Chang's production design, the saturated colors, and sometimes the use of black and white, which are like aesthetic contrasts to the color images. And I bring all that up really to show the visual sensuality of Wong Kar Wai, and this is really what distinguishes his works, isn't it? I think this is not just in Happy Together, but in all of his films, I would say. And what are the emotions that come out of these images? In fact, a great range of emotions, I think. Of course, the whole film is about a gay relationship, and actually, it's about two lovers who meet. They have a passionate affair, and then they fall out, and then they're separate, and we can talk about that later. But the emotions then that come with this whole affair, of course, are dealt with, isn't it? Right?
Sorry, is there a specific feeling or emotion that's specifically tied to the 1990s in these films?
Well, yeah, the feeling of anxiety, the feeling of instability, right? The feeling of, fear mixed with anguish, angst, all of those things. And escape. The whole film is virtually a kind of escape away from Hong Kong, right, to a far off place, which is of course Argentina, because the film is set in Argentina. So I mean, if you want to associate that with the 1990s, yes, that would be it. I think that would be more the case of Happy Together. Although in the other two films, like Chungking Express and Fallen Angels, there is some of that sense of dread and fear and anxiety, but it actually also covers other emotions like dynamism, the vibrancy, the energy, great energy of the characters and the whole place. Chungking Express, which is of course a reference to that hub in Kowloon. In Tsim Sha Tsui, right? I'm sure everybody knows what I'm referring to. And the other locations in the film as well, and of course in Fallen Angels too. So, all pointing to the great energy and the great dynamism of Hong Kong.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Lai, is there anything that's specific, a feeling that Wong Kar Wai evokes for this specific era?
I would concur with Stephen. This whole idea of escape and a lot of very specific things like South America. Right? I think a lot of the imagination of South America, even as Happy Together, he chooses Argentina as a setting. It's a really sort of presaged, in the 60s when a lot of the South American music and dance move, samba, calypso, and all that. And Stephen himself has also mentioned about the textual references to Manuel Puig, right, and all that. So I think there's already that idea, right, of an escape, and that setting was already set up, in the 1960s. The trilogy, in a sense, right, escape to somewhere. And of course, again, the 1960s wasn't a peaceful era as I described just now as well. Just like the 1990s, because there was a Cold War going on. Right? There was a lot of insurgencies, right, Berlin independency and all that, and of course that impacted businesses and even the film industry in Hong Kong. But meanwhile, you have the 1950s movie productions who who can bring some aspects of the joy, and of that sort of comfort, right, to know that yes, there is this war going on, the Cold War going on, and there's a difficult transitioning from colonial states to independent states, right, everywhere, right, in Southeast Asia, and of course, riots in Hong Kong and all that, which Wong Kar Wai splices as a documentary footage, right? It's putting documentary footage into your own film. So there's a very specific reference to the very tumultuous era. But then there is also, suddenly you also hear the music, you see the you see the cheongsams, you have this sort of visual splendor that Simon has talked about. So I think that is also that. I think actually, if I can make that connection to the 1990s of what Stephen's talking about, there are some kind of parallels, and this 2046 is like this shoot, right? This very fast moving shoot. And reprising, what he does in Chungking Express, right? Moving across these kinds of time eras.
Right. It's interesting how both of you mentioned that across, the two trilogies, there's a sense of escape, like that is shared between these two eras, right? So another common thread that I see that links these two trilogies together is a sense of place. So we talk about sense of time, and there's also a sense of place that links your trilogies together. So particularly interesting for me is the role that migratory experiences play in negotiating or mediating a sense of place in these films, right? So my question very quickly to Dr. Lai is, comparing Wong Kar Wai's 1960s trilogy with the Hong Kong films of the 1950s and 1960s that you have mentioned in your slides, is there any significant difference in the way Nanyang is being imagined through the lens of the Chinese diaspora? Right? And also for Dr. Teo, I guess the most obvious representation of migrant experience in the 1990s trilogy that you have mentioned is, of course, in Happy Together, where the protagonists move from Hong Kong to Latin America, right? But what about the film's inclusion, the other two films' inclusion of migrant communities within Hong Kong society itself, most prominently South Asian communities in Chongqing Express and Taiwanese immigrants in Fallen Angels? So I'm interested to know what part do these specific migratory experiences play in negotiating a sense of place in these two films? Maybe Dr. Lai can take the question, please.
Yeah, thank you. I think, as you suggested, right, there's a lot of migration going on. There's a lot of imagination of what the immigrant experience is, and in the Mood for Love, you already see, a Shanghainese community is being built up, and these could be, right, we don't know for sure, but these could be those who have moved from Shanghai to Hong Kong, because when China became a communist, right, even the Filipino musicians who were performing in the performance areas, nightclubs and bars in Shanghai had to find jobs elsewhere, right, in Taiwan, and a lot of them moved to Hong Kong. Some of them moved back to the Philippines. So there's that hint, right, in the background, right, of this movements of people, transiting, the cosmopolitanism that is suggestive of both Hong Kong, Singapore, and perhaps even Buenos Aires as places that accommodate all these such movement, and of course, if you talk about the 1950s movies that Wong Kar Wai have experienced. Right, he spent a lot of time, we are told, watching movies in the theaters in Hong Kong. So he would have absorbed, this reinvention of of cosmopolitanism in Hong Kong films, using a lot of other sort of Western transatlantic ideas, including those from South America, right? Because you just say the word calypso, chachambo, all these words suddenly instantly connect you to that era's representation and also the fashion of the time. So when he invokes these into his 1960s trilogies, he is sort of presenting all these for us again, right? And I need to explain, because I'm not a film scholar, Stephen Teo is the real Sifu here, but it got me really excited, because I was looking very closely at that period, right? Post-war, Cold War, and the kind of independence era. So I think that kind of suddenly, right, through a presentation once again of this whole decade, right, that we see again, the very close connections between Hong Kong and Southeast Asia, but which I think now people won't believe that there were such close connections existing at the moment.
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Teo, about migrants.
Well, of course, just referring specifically to the 1990s trilogy, right? Those three films. Those three films, well, in particular, let's just start with Chungking Express, and then Fallen Angels, and the so-called migratory experience in those two films are, of course, nothing more than essentially than what Chee Kien has been saying, and that is, it's reflective of the movement of peoples across borders. And Hong Kong, of course, is a cosmopolitan hub, receiving migrants either as professionals or as casual workers or whatever, traders, business people, whatever. And the films, I think, reflect that. But there's actually another point that I might want to raise, because you have also said that there were, I mean, particularly in Chungking Express, there were South Asians
communities.
The South Asian community was particularly kind of like not just a backdrop, but there was some kind of significance to their presence in the film. And I think that's quite true. And then, of course, the Taiwanese presence in
Fallen Angels.
And again, it points to the same kind of thing in terms of what I would call a question of identity.
Okay.
Actually, I think this is a theme, quite a major theme in the actually in all of Wong's films, I would say, but particularly so in the 1990s trilogy. And why do I say identity? Actually, I think Wong Kar Wai is sort of obsessed with this question of what is Chinese identity, right? And he even in his breakthrough film, which is Days of Being Wild, he features the Leslie Cheung character as not a pure Chinese character, really. Of course, in the film, as you all know, he goes to the Philippines to search for his mother, right? And so the question of what is his identity, I think, becomes a prominent theme in the film. And but he speaks Chinese, or rather he speaks Cantonese, and he assumes that Hong Kong Chinese identity, right? And Wong already is throwing this question to the viewer, is he Chinese, right? I mean, he may be half Chinese, but so that the whole reverberation of this question of identity comes true, I think, and I think that is also the aspect of Chungking Express as well, and in Happy Together. Actually, I think Happy Together was originally meant as a film of Chinese migrants going to Argentina, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Yeah, right. Chee Kien has corroborated this.
Agreed.
But then, of course, the film became what it is, which is a gay film, right? A film about two gay lovers. But it also touches on, again, this question of Hong Kong Chinese identity through the relationship between the two gay lovers and their relationship to China, shall we say. I mean, I did point out just now that the film can work as that kind of a commentary or an allegory about the Hong Kong-China relationship through the 1997 issue, I think it actually resonates that way. But I think it's even more resonant in terms of the gay relationship,
Right.
Because after all, if being gay you are not recognized anyway, let's say, then what's the point of identity? So I think this is the idea of identity in the film. But I think we can actually say a lot more about identity, as we move along, actually, because I think there's another point that I would actually like to raise in terms of, for example, the gay identity.
So I think we can move on to this point actually, because we'll be moving on to the audience Q&A section right now. And there is a question by Daryl that precisely touches on this question that you have raised, Dr. Teo. So Daryl has this question. Oh, and before that, to whoever who's watching us right now, if you have a question, you can just post it as a comment, and then we'll try to address each one of your questions in the time that we have left. Right. So Daryl has this question to Dr. Teo. On Dr. Teo's point that Wong Kar Wai is not particularly concerned with the politics of the handover, and this is also what I got from your talk, and I was also a little bit, perplexed by that. How would one explain his gesture to the milestone of 2046 in his titling of the film? And this, I guess, relates to your point about Hong Kong China identity in Wong Kar Wai's body of works, right, Dr. Teo?
No, I said that the 1997 subtext in Happy Together, looking back at it now, today, is not as strong as it was then. I think this whole thing about the 1997 question, the 1997 handover, I think is most resonant to people of my generation, right, or people who are like 10 or 20 years younger, who have lived through that whole period. I would say from 1984 onwards. 1984, of course, being the year when the Joint Declaration. From 1994 onwards towards 1997. So if you have lived through that period, you would feel the whole that whole syndrome of 1997 much more acutely. And I think it is a rather special kind of feeling that I don't think Hong Kong, the younger generation of Hong Kong youths, the younger, the people who are now protesting on the streets and so on, share that kind of feeling, because after all, they were born after 1997, most of them, or just maybe, there were babies, perhaps during 1997 itself, right? So they wouldn't know what 1997 means, really.
Can I?
So, yeah. Okay.
Dr. Lai?
You wanted to interview?
Yeah, sorry, Stephen.
Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting. I think this whole theme of mobility comes in again because and ties back to what you're talking about. Of him operating in the overseas, Chinese circles, right? Everywhere that he went, because for example, and the Andy Lau character in Days of Being Wild, right, can speak Mandarin easily to the hotel manager, right, and then of course the Tony Leung character, can easily just suddenly go off from his Hong Kong and then suddenly land a job in a newspaper office in Sinchu Jitpo in Singapore. So that kind of mobility, right, is something that he's also hinting at, because he himself, his family, don't forget, something that might have been more terrible in the minds of a lot of people was 1949, when all of the sort of Shanghainese and people who were dreading the takeover of or so-called takeover of China becoming from a republican to a communist state, right? And they moved, right? They moved to avert a disaster. So it's an interesting question why the film was named 2046 and not 2047, because in up until 2046, there is a chance of escape, right? There is a chance of moving away if you really don't agree with the new politics. Then that's 2046 for you. It's not 2047.
Interesting point. Right. Okay, so thank you for the responses. We'll take another question. This time is addressed to Dr. Lai. So Dr. Lai, what do you think is the significance of adding the footage, right, that you've mentioned actually, in The Mood for Love, the footage of Charles de Gaulle's visit to Cambodia, apart from explaining why the main protagonist was at Angkor Wat?
I think if you, at particular point in time, right, he's a reporter. We are told that we're shown that he's a reporter, and in September 1966, that was a sort of a very, very big event, right? That Charles de Gaulle, right, and why is Charles de Gaulle denouncing the U.S. presence in Vietnam, and then not go to Vietnam but go to Cambodia to make and why Charles de Gaulle and why not other leaders? So again, you can tie it back to the politics of the time, right? It's French Indochina, right? It's still being colonized, right? France was still colonizing Indochina, including Vietnam as well as Cambodia, right? So he's of course French, right? He's a French president, and he has interest, right, in looking at the situation and trying to get the US out. So in other words, that was a very, very important event, and I think Wong Kar Wai very cleverly just uses that to mark that, but also as I mentioned before, surfaces a lot of issues about Western colonization, right? And China, right? The reason why China and Hong Kong came into being was because of the events in history, shall we say? And then of course Southeast Asia itself was colonized. So that motif is sort of hiding in the background. And then of course then it works to advantage for Wong Kar Wai to also get Zhang Wenwan to be in Cambodia, right? But he's not in Phnom Penh. But presumably he has covered the event, or it was before the event, and then he goes to visit Angkor Wat, to connect with the narrative, right, of the kind of lovers, chasing each other around in the space of Nanyang, from Cambodia to Singapore to Hong Kong, right? And then we are also told, right, including Manila as well. So I think it was a very significant point, right, in the trilogy, right, to say something, right, because Hong Kong can never become independent, while all these post-colonial events are being played out, right, in Cambodia, Indochina, Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, and Indonesia were already, on their way to independence. But then you have the deadlines of 1997 and 2047, looming over Hong Kong. Right? So in a sense, right, at least for me, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but there's that very appropriate moment to insert this documentary film of Charles de Gaulle visiting Cambodia.
Right, thank you. We hope that answers your question, JC. Now we'll take Jessica's question. So to Dr. Teo, can the tango soundtracks in Happy Together mean something else or perform other functions other than being the emotional cue or an allegory to the entangling gay relationship?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and I'm not so sure I can answer it very well. But the tango music, right? I think we all know that the tango is a kind of a erotic dance, and the film is about an erotic affair, a gay affair, and we might try to link up this idea of the erotic nature of music with the relationship itself, I suppose. But I'm not prone to that kind of interpretation. Basically, I tend to think that the use of music in Wong Kar Wai's films play a certain role in evoking time and place, memory, perhaps nostalgia. For example, the use of all those kind of like American pop songs in the 1960s trilogy, and in fact the use of "Happy Together," the song by the Turtles in "Happy Together,"
and in the mood for love,
and in the mood for love, all the use of those songs are actually part and parcel of this idea of time and place as well, and particularly time, evocative of 1960s, which is the period that most resonates with Wong Kar Wai and most resonates with me, because I grew up in the 1960s, and so I share with Wong Kar Wai the Chee Kien as well. You see, so we all share that same nostalgia, right?
Right. Okay, thank you. We'll take one final question. It's sort of related to the question addressed to Dr. Lai just now. So Tom asked the question, why do you think Wong Kar Wai added documentary footage of the 1966-1977 riots in 2046? And why use documentary footage rather than dramatize them like John Woo did in Bullet in the Head, for instance?
Yeah, thank you for the question. That's very interesting question. That's why if you look at a lot of the other Wong Kar Wai movies, because like Steven said, I was accustomed maybe to Chungking Express and all that, right? And then suddenly the first film I watched was in the movie, and suddenly you have Charles de Gaulle coming in. So I said, okay, maybe he's trying to say something, but then it comes back again, right? Close to the beginning of 2046. And I in some ways they're also sort of trying to mark the different phases of the film, right? And I maybe it's not so easy to mark them, but the first, right, Days of Being Wild, is almost up to 1962, 63. And then in the Mood for Love, he specifically tells you 1963 Singapore, right? And then of course, he ends with Charles de Gaulle, 1966, and then 2046 he starts again, right, with the two 1967 riots, which were sort of two riots in of course by comparison with the Umbrella Woman, two riots in a year is nothing, but then 1966, then 1977, right? So it's almost as if, okay, that's 1966. This is 1967, and this is Hong Kong, right? And this is what's happening in Hong Kong. So I think so you're right? The placement of documentary clips itself serves a very, I suppose, very specific purpose. I think they are time markers, and I think also they point to, you know, the certain form of violence that was actually happening, you know, backgrounding the entire sort of movies as well, right? Although we are given this dimensions into, you know, the splendor of you know, for vision, for sound and things like that. I do think that there is you know, there is a very particular reason why you would put footage, documentary footage, rather than, you know, dramatize them as he points out, right, in John Woo.
Right. Thank you.
Actually, might I just add briefly to this question here about the use of documentary footage? Actually, this is a recurring thing in many of Wong's films. You know, if you've seen all of his other films, there's usually a segment. Usually, it comes towards the end where he shows you this kind of documentary footage. And historical footage as well, basically. I mean, you know, I tend to think that they serve some aesthetic purpose.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I would agree with what you said, Chee Kien, about, you know, that it may serve some specific kind of time purpose as well.
Time markers, right?
Time markers, right? As you said,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, right. Very great answers. Right. We've also come to the end of an hour, so maybe I'll end by, you know, just thanking the speakers. And I think for me, what I've the one thought that I've gotten out of this is, well, you talk a lot about, both of you actually highlighted so much about mobility in the films, right? And the idea of impermanence across these two trilogies. But at the same time, I'm reminded of the dense web of intertextuality that happens across all his films, that sort of creates a kind of internal coherence and internal stability, even, you know, in Wong Kar Wai's body of works. So that to me is very interesting, like this contrast or even irony or contradictions between this dominant concept of impermanence across his films, and but artistically there is, you know, this idea of internal stability and coherence in his, you know, in his art. So that is one key point maybe that I have taken away from this talk. And so thank you once again, Dr. Teo and Dr. Lai. And maybe just to end off this talk, can I just ask each of you one question? So what is one quality of Wong Kar Wai's works, you know, that to you is most representative of the director?
Well, I would say sensuality.
Right.
You know, the very sensual use of music, you know, colors, you know, props and stuff, you know, costumes, whatever, wardrobe, you know, hairstyles, things like that, you know. So,
right.
You know, they're all very, very evocative, and they all add up, you know, to the world of Wong Kar Wai.
Right. I think a lot of audiences will agree with you on that. Dr. Lai?
I would say time, right? Because I again, I'm not a film historian, but I am a architectural urban historian. So that a certain period of time, right, like the 1960s, really sort of you know, brings me back through those films, because I think it starts to make you very sort of think back about, you know, for me, right, to think back about what the 1960s was, and then suddenly to make it you know, you can see it right on the big screen again, on the small screen. If you, but and I think that notion of making those kind of historical connections, and to think about, you know, what was culture, and what were people like during that time, because at the end of the day, right, we can talk about a lot of things, but it's really about the people, you know, and we've really talked about the people, the relationships, and the era that the people have lived through, right? So I think as a historian, I think, you know, I'm not saying his is the only one, but, you know, you can find a lot of that history, a lot of the joy of you know, thinking about what that history is, you know, for as a very specific type of audience member in myself.
Right, thank you. So there you go. We have two different perspectives on Wong Kar Wai's film coming from two specialists of different disciplines and different backgrounds. And thank you so much, Dr. Tu and Dr. Lai. And also thank you to all of you who have been watching us over the past hour. We hope you also continue to support the good work of Asian Film Archive in the upcoming months in this year. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you.